You don't lose leverage when someone outranks you. You lose it earlier, in small moments that feel harmless while they happen. The extra explanation, the quick agreement to keep things smooth, the urge to show your thinking before anyone asks. Nothing dramatic, but hierarchy rarely changes in dramatic moments. It changes through accumulation. Most people believe leverage begins when authority becomes visible, when a title changes or responsibility becomes official. That's wrong. Leverage forms earlier, when people start adjusting their behavior around you without being told to. Because hierarchy is always measuring one thing, how much uncertainty your presence creates or removes. If your reactions require management, influence moves away from you. If your behavior reduces noise, influence moves toward you. This video will show you the hidden mechanics behind that process, how leverage is gained or lost in ordinary interactions, and the specific behavioral shifts that make people orient toward you instead of around you. That signal is subtle, but once you see it, you notice it everywhere. The invisible signal that says whether you increase friction or reduce it. Most professionals never notice when this evaluation begins. They assume they are being measured when performance reviews arrive. But leverage starts forming long before anyone speaks about advancement. It begins in ordinary interactions. A meeting where your idea isn't chosen. A delay in feedback. A decision that moves forward without your input. These moments trigger something subtle. You feel a small drop in certainty, and the nervous system wants to restore stability quickly. So you explain more. You clarify your intentions. You add context nobody requested. From your perspective, you are being responsible. From the outside, something else happens. You negotiate your own jurisdiction. Every extra explanation quietly signals that your position is still open for negotiation. They simply feel it, and feeling is enough for hierarchy to adjust. Leverage is not about force. It is about how much adjustment others feel they must make around you. When someone constantly explains, others prepare for emotional management. When someone reacts quickly, others anticipate volatility. When someone changes tone, depending on who enters the room, others recalibrate their expectations. These are reaction receipts, evidence collected without anyone writing anything down. The system remembers how much energy it must spend managing you, and energy is the real currency inside hierarchy. Most people think this is about personality. It isn't. It's about cost. Who becomes easier to move forward without additional management? Most people think leverage comes from being needed. That is the first illusion. Being needed creates dependency. Leverage comes from being stable. Dependency keeps you where you are. Stability allows movement. This is where the first quiet inversion appears. The harder you try to prove your value, the more you signal uncertainty about it. You speak longer to ensure you are understood. You volunteer effort to demonstrate commitment. You say yes quickly to show reliability. Each behavior feels cooperative, but cooperation without boundaries becomes extraction. You give access that was never earned. Access to your time, access to your attention, access to your emotional regulation. And once access is granted repeatedly, it becomes expected. That expectation reshapes how others perceive your role. You become available rather than authoritative, useful rather than directional, reliable but lightweight. Hierarchy simply adapts to patterns. If your behavior signals that you will absorb pressure without negotiation, pressure flows toward you. If your behavior signals that you need reassurance before acting, decisions flow around you. Leverage is direction, not workload. Watch what happens when uncertainty enters a conversation. Silence appears. Someone asks an open question. The answer isn't obvious. Some people rush to fill the space. They speak quickly, adding detail as they go. Others hesitate, waiting for clearer instruction. Both reactions reveal the same mechanism: dependence on external structure. This is where most people lose the room. They think more explanation creates more influence. But hierarchy reads the opposite. The more you need to explain yourself, the less settled your position feels. The person with leverage behaves differently. They slow down. They tolerate the silence. They compress rather than expand. Not to appear confident, because their internal pace isn't controlled by the room. Nothing external changes here. No title, no announcement. Only one shift. People stop reacting to you and start orienting around you. This is the first sign of authority gravity. People begin orienting toward your calm instead of away from your urgency. No one announces it, but decisions start waiting for your response. Conversations pause slightly when you speak, not because you dominate, because you reduce cognitive noise. Hierarchy moves toward clarity, always. That is why leverage exists before titles. The title only confirms what people already feel. Most professionals miss this because they focus on visible signals: recognition, feedback, public validation. But leverage forms inside micro-decisions nobody remembers later. How you respond when challenged, how long you defend an idea, whether you need agreement before moving forward. These moments reveal your relationship with influence itself. At this point, the question changes. It's no longer about whether you are competent. It's about what happens to the emotional stability of the room when outcomes don't go your way. That is where hierarchy quietly decides who can carry more weight. Early in their careers, many people treat influence like validation. If their idea is accepted, they feel secure. If it is rejected, they feel diminished. The emotional shift becomes visible, and visibility changes how others measure risk, because authority expands consequences. If your emotional state moves with every outcome, leadership imagines instability scaling upward, not intentionally, automatically. This is why emotional containment matters more than brilliance. Brilliance can be unpredictable. Containment scales. Leverage grows where unpredictability decreases. You don't build leverage by controlling others. You build it by controlling how much of your internal state becomes external. The room should not need to adjust to your reactions. That is the quiet rule. Most people violate it without realizing. A small sigh when priorities change. A sharper tone when time pressure rises. A defensive explanation when an idea is challenged. Each moment feels insignificant. Together, they form a pattern, and patterns decide leverage. Here is the uncomfortable part. The system is not evaluating intention. It is evaluating impact. You might believe you are being transparent. Others experience emotional labor. You might think you are showing passion. Others experience unpredictability. Leverage doesn't care about your reasons. It responds to your effect. This is the moment hierarchy quietly splits people into two paths. Those who keep proving value through effort, and those who start creating stability through restraint. The difference is almost invisible, but the outcomes diverge fast. This is where many high performers get trapped. They solve everything quickly. They absorb extra work. They keep systems running when pressure rises. Everyone depends on them. And because everyone depends on them, their leverage quietly shrinks. Not because they are weak, because their role becomes structurally fixed. Removing them would create disruption, so movement slows. They confuse importance with influence, but importance can be immobile. Influence moves. Hierarchy asks a simple question. If this person moved upward, would the system become easier or harder to manage? If the answer is harder, movement pauses, even when performance is exceptional. This is why leverage requires selectivity. You cannot accept every request without negotiating the frame. Endless availability signals that your boundaries are negotiable, and negotiable boundaries reduce perceived authority. Authority is not loud, it is consistent. People with leverage protect their focus without announcing it. They decline without over-explaining. They choose where to apply attention. Because attention shapes reality. Where you place it tells others what matters. And where you place it carelessly tells others you can be redirected easily. Every redirection is a small surrender of jurisdiction. Most people don't notice these losses because they feel polite. But politeness often hides avoidance. Avoidance of friction, avoidance of discomfort, avoidance of being misunderstood. The cost is subtle. You gain harmony, you lose weight. And hierarchy always senses weight. There comes a moment where something shifts. You stop asking how to be seen as valuable. You start asking how to reduce complexity around you. That shift changes behavior immediately. You speak less, but clearer. You stop defending every point. You let silence work. You move without announcing every decision. People begin feeling something difficult to describe. Not dominance, not charisma. Stability. The sense that things become easier around you. This is where leverage begins forming. Long before anyone calls it authority. Leverage grows fastest when you stop trying to appear influential. Because trying introduces tension. Tension creates noise. Noise increases management cost. Hierarchy moves away from cost. Always. The people who quietly gain influence are rarely the loudest. They are the least expensive to trust. They make decisions without creating emotional residue. They clarify without defending. They adjust without collapsing. And the system notices, even when no one says anything. Because influence is not granted in announcements, it is granted in accumulation. Small moments stacking until a pattern becomes undeniable. By the time a title changes, leverage already exists. The real decision happened earlier, when your presence stopped requiring supervision, when your reactions stopped demanding management, when your attention stopped being freely extracted. That is where authority gravity begins. And most people never realize they were building it or losing it the entire time. There is another moment where leverage quietly disappears, and most people mistake it for professionalism. You are asked for input. You give a clear opinion. The decision goes another direction. Nothing dramatic happens, but something shifts internally. You feel the urge to re-explain, to clarify why your idea would have worked, to protect the accuracy of your thinking. From the inside, it feels reasonable. From the outside, it feels like attachment. And attachment changes how authority is perceived. Because leverage is not measured by how strongly you defend your position, it is measured by how calmly you release it once the direction changes. People with low leverage fight to preserve ownership. People with growing leverage orient toward the outcome instead. That difference is subtle, but expensive. The moment you start protecting your contribution instead of the objective, you train others to expect emotional negotiation. The access ledger updates. More attention will be required later, more reassurance, more management. And hierarchy always moves away from anything that increases management cost. Watch what happens in meetings where uncertainty rises. Some people begin filling space with explanation. Some start proving how much work they have already done. Some signal urgency through tone alone. None of it is intentional. It is a nervous system attempting to regain control. But control and leverage are not the same thing. Control pushes, leverage pulls. The person building leverage often looks quieter than everyone else, not passive, compressed. Their language becomes shorter, their decisions clearer, their emotional range less reactive to the room. Others begin adjusting around them without noticing. This is the first real sign that authority gravity is forming. Not when people agree with you, when people start conserving their own energy around you, because they trust you will not create unnecessary turbulence. And once that trust appears, something changes beneath the surface. You stop being evaluated for performance alone. You start being evaluated for environmental impact. Do things stabilize when you enter, or do they become heavier? That question rarely gets asked aloud, but it quietly shapes every decision that follows. Up to this point, leverage has been forming quietly. Now the environment changes. Because once influence starts becoming visible, the test is no longer whether you can build stability. It's whether access changes your behavior. There is a moment most people misunderstand. Access increases. You are included earlier in conversations. People ask what you think before decisions finalize. On the surface, it feels like recognition, but access is not reward. Access is pressure. Hierarchy is testing whether proximity to influence changes your behavior. This is where many people lose the leverage they quietly built. They start speaking more, explaining longer, trying to prove they belong in the room. The shift is almost invisible, but the room feels it immediately. Because authority does not expand through volume, it expands through precision. The more access you receive, the less explanation you can afford. Every extra sentence becomes a negotiation of jurisdiction, and negotiation signals uncertainty. Watch what happens when someone with emerging influence is challenged publicly. A question interrupts their direction. Someone disagrees. The room becomes still for a moment. Behavioral X-rays appear instantly. Some people argue to win. Some retreat to avoid friction. Some rush to justify their reasoning before anyone questions it. All three reactions reveal the same mechanism: fear of losing position. But real leverage behaves differently. You separate identity from the idea. You clarify once, then you move forward. Not because you don't care, because leverage depends on emotional economy. The room should not feel your internal turbulence. This is where hierarchy begins projecting forward. If this person had more authority, what happens to the environment around them? Does tension increase or decrease? Do decisions become clearer or heavier? The answers are rarely spoken, but they shape how influence expands. Most professionals assume leverage is measured by outcomes. Outcomes matter, but outcomes fluctuate. Patterns persist. Hierarchy trusts patterns. That is why two people can make the same mistake and be judged completely differently. One becomes defensive, the other stabilizes quickly. Recovery speed becomes the signal. Because authority is not defined by avoiding mistakes, it is defined by how quickly stability returns after them. This leads to the first quiet framework you need to understand. Leverage grows through compression, not expansion. Compression means fewer words, clearer intent, lower emotional spill. Expansion means more explanation, more justification, more visible effort. Most people expand when pressure rises. They try to make themselves clearer by adding more. But clarity is rarely created by adding. It is created by removing. The more concise your response under pressure, the more psychological weight it carries. People begin trusting your direction because it feels anchored, not reactive. This is why leverage often feels slow while it's forming. Nothing dramatic happens. No announcement, just small adjustments. People start asking for your perspective instead of your execution. Decisions arrive with less instruction. Silence appears after you speak, not because people disagree, but because they are thinking. That silence is not emptiness. It is recalibration. And recalibration is a sign of influence. Here is where the access ledger shifts again. A senior leader asks for an update. You have two options. Option 1. Explain every detail to prove you've been working hard. Option 2. Frame the outcome, the risk, and the next decision clearly. Most people choose the first option because effort feels safer than judgment. But effort increases supervision cost. Judgment reduces it. And leverage always moves toward people who reduce supervision. This is the moment where extraction often hides. You start giving access to your thinking process that nobody asked for. You expose uncertainty before decisions require it. You fill silence with reassurance, and without realizing it, you train others to expect full transparency as the baseline. The cost appears later. You become the person who must constantly explain. Explanation becomes your tax. The person with leverage does something different. They communicate direction, not emotional process. They reveal what matters. They withhold what creates noise. Not secrecy, discretion. Discretion is psychological economy, knowing what the room needs and nothing more. This is where many careers stall. People believe visibility equals influence, so they narrate everything. But narration often signals dependence on approval. Influence grows when your decisions stand without constant narration. There is a case that repeats across almost every hierarchy. A project begins drifting. Deadlines compress. Tension rises quietly. Everyone notices the problem. Nobody acts immediately. This is not negligence. It is observation. Leadership is watching what happens before intervention becomes necessary. Some people escalate upward immediately, protecting themselves from risk. Some begin explaining why the problem exists, protecting their image. Some wait, hoping clarity appears, avoiding ownership. None of these responses build leverage. The person moving toward authority does something else. They stabilize first. They reduce noise. They define reality clearly. Then they make the next decision obvious. No announcement, no performance, just direction. And this is the moment the ledger updates decisively. Because hierarchy is not only watching who solves problems, it is watching who lowers the emotional temperature while solving them. Anyone can look competent when momentum is strong. Very few people create stability when momentum breaks. That distinction changes everything. Leverage accelerates when people start trusting your nervous system more than your words. This is why emotional neutrality scales. Not emotionlessness, neutrality. You can care deeply without broadcasting volatility. You can disagree without destabilizing the room. You can hold tension without spreading it. When that happens, people begin orienting around you automatically. And orientation is the real form of authority. There is another subtle trigger that appears as leverage grows. You receive less feedback. Instructions become shorter. Oversight fades. Most people interpret this as safety. It isn't. It is a quieter phase of evaluation. Hierarchy wants to see how you behave without structure. Some people slow down, afraid of making mistakes without approval. Others move aggressively, mistaking autonomy for independence. Both reactions reveal dependence on external signals. True leverage looks different. You maintain alignment without constant visibility. You move decisively without announcing every step. You communicate outcomes without defending your process. This signals ownership, and ownership reduces monitoring cost. Remember this clearly. Promotions and influence are not only about what you can handle. They are about how much attention you require while handling it. Attention is the real scarcity at higher levels. The less emotional energy you consume, the safer it feels to expand your authority. Here is the sovereign cost most people avoid seeing. When leverage grows, comfort decreases. You lose immediate reassurance. You lose constant feedback. You lose the safety of clear approval signals. Because higher levels rarely provide certainty. They provide ambiguity. And ambiguity exposes whether your stability is internal or borrowed. Many people try to force momentum here. They create activity to feel progress, more meetings, more updates, more visible effort. But forcing motion often creates instability disguised as leadership. Real leverage tolerates slower movement when direction is correct. It understands that authority is measured by how little disruption follows your decisions. Eventually, something subtle changes again. Conversations shift. People ask for framing instead of execution. Your words start setting the tone of discussions. Not because you demanded influence, because the environment learned it becomes clearer when you speak. This is the moment many people misread. They become louder, more assertive, trying to match the perceived authority. And in doing so, they break the gravity they built. Leverage is quiet. It does not need to announce itself. It appears when your presence reduces complexity, not when your personality dominates space. By now, the hierarchy is no longer asking whether you are capable. It is asking something else. If influence expanded around this person, would stability increase or decrease? That question decides everything. And the answer is formed through hundreds of moments you barely remember. A pause before reacting. A shorter explanation. A calm response under pressure. A decision made without drama. These moments accumulate until trust becomes inevitable. At this stage, leverage stops feeling like something you are trying to build. It starts feeling like something you are protecting. Less performance, more precision. Then the final shift happens. You stop thinking about leverage entirely. This is where the sovereign mind appears, not controlling the room, but no longer negotiating with it. Your attention moves toward clarity and direction. You stop measuring whether you are being noticed. You focus on what reduces friction for everyone involved. Paradoxically, this is when influence expands fastest, because the desire to appear influential disappears. What remains is consistency, and consistency is what hierarchy trusts most. There is a simple self-test hidden inside all of this. When uncertainty appears, do you expand or compress? Do you explain or orient? Do you seek reassurance or define direction? Your answers determine whether leverage grows or dissolves. For the next 3 days, run a simple protocol. Notice every moment you feel the urge to explain more than necessary. Pause. Cut your response in half. Deliver the outcome, the risk, and the next decision only. Then stop. Observe what happens. Watch how people respond when you stop negotiating your own frame. Watch how silence changes. Watch how attention shifts. Because leverage is not built through force. It forms when your presence lowers the amount of energy others must spend managing uncertainty. Titles do not create that. They reveal it. By the time authority becomes visible, the decision has already been made. Not in a meeting, not in a review, but in the quiet accumulation of moments where your behavior taught the system one thing: that influence can move toward you without increasing instability. And once that belief forms, hierarchy stops feeling random. You realize something uncomfortable. Leverage was never withheld from you. It was being measured the entire time. And the moment you stop giving it away, it starts returning. There is one final misunderstanding that quietly destroys leverage even after it begins forming. People assume leverage means being right more often, so they start defending accuracy, correcting details, protecting precision. But authority does not grow from being correct. It grows from being directional. The room does not need perfect certainty. It needs orientation. When you insist on proving correctness, you slow momentum. When you provide direction, you reduce decision friction. Hierarchy notices the difference immediately, because higher levels operate under incomplete information all the time. Waiting for perfect clarity signals hesitation. Moving recklessly signals instability. Leverage sits between the two. Calibrated movement. Another pattern appears here. Someone questions your decision publicly, not aggressively, just enough to test your reaction. Many people tighten. Their tone shifts slightly. They begin explaining their logic step by step. What they don't realize is that the explanation is no longer about clarity. It becomes self-protection. And self-protection always increases monitoring cost. The person with leverage does something quieter. They acknowledge the challenge, clarify the direction, then return attention to the objective. No visible need to win, no need to dominate the exchange. Because leverage isn't threatened by disagreement. It is revealed through how little friction disagreement creates around you. This is the final inversion. You stop trying to be the strongest voice in the room. You become the most stabilizing one. And stabilization changes hierarchy faster than brilliance ever will. Because people do not only follow intelligence, they follow what lowers their internal noise. Once that happens, something subtle shifts permanently. You are no longer included because of contribution alone. You are included because your presence changes the environment. And that is the moment leverage stops being something you build. It becomes something you carry.